Good evening, everyone. I'm Michael Anderson, President and CEO of the Oklahoma City Museum of Art, and I'm very pleased to welcome you all this evening to Preston Singletary, Raven in the Box of Daylight. Thank you for joining us for tonight's program and for the Sustainers Preview. The exhibition has been organized by the Museum of Glass Tacoma and presented here at our location by the Chickasaw Nation. We're very thankful for their and all of your support for this exhibition. Let's give everyone a round of applause. You may have also noticed a second glass exhibition, Translucent Bodies, a figure in contemporary studio glass, as you left Raven in the Box of Daylight, and that is our second iteration of the Rose Family Glass Collection, and Sarah Jane and Jay are here tonight. Lisa and Ken could not join us, but let's give them a round of applause as well. Thank you so much. Now on to our artists for this spectacular exhibition. Preston Singletary's art has become synonymous with the relationship between Tlingit culture and fine art. His sculptures deal with themes of Tlingit stories and traditional designs, while also using music to shape his contemporary perspective of Native culture. Starting in 1982, Preston learned glassblowing in the Seattle area and has worked with artists such as Benjamin Moore, Dante Marioni, Richard Royal, Dan Daly, and Lino Tagliapietra. A lot of artists whom we have thanks to that Rose Family Glass Collection, as a matter of fact. He honed his skills as a student, assistant, and teacher at the Pilchuck Glass School, and which was co-founded by Dale Chihuly, who, of course, all of you know as well. Preston now serves on the board of Pilchuck. In 2000, Singletary received an honorary name from Elder Joe David, and in 2009, Singletary received an honorary doctorate degree from the University of Puget Sound. 40 years of glassmaking, creating music, and working together with elders has put him in a position of being a keeper of cultural knowledge while forging new directions in new materials and concepts of indigenous art. We are very honored to have him here this evening. Please join me in welcoming Preston Singletary.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for being here tonight, and thank you to the Museum of Oklahoma to bring me here with this exhibition. And I'll start by saying, Preston Ach Sayi, Tlingit Gainach, Kochain Duasak, Kagwantana, Chutsati, Sialakwan Ayachat. Now that I've exhausted my knowledge of the Tlingit language, I will proceed in English. It's a brief introduction to me, and let's see if this is going to work. So I got this fancy wireless mic so I can strut around on stage like a TED Talk, you know. I'm going to see how that goes. I don't know. So I grew up in Seattle. I am a Tlingit tribal member. My great-grandmother moved to, for those of you who do not know where the Tlingit region is, it's here in Alaska. The southern part of Alaska, we call it Southeast Alaska, which is very strange because it's the west coast, right? But, you know, there's much more west part of Alaska. So we come from a region that is, you know, right along the coastline, mountains coming directly out of the water. And this is our map of our traditional region. So many years ago, I started to think about the Tlingit Way, the street sign up in Sitka, Alaska. My great-grandmother grew up in Sitka, and she is the woman here in the center of this photo, and she lived to be 100 years old and passed away in 1980. So I did have the good fortune of spending time with her. So anyway, she was widowed in 1919. She was married to James Bartlett, and James passed away in a sawmill accident. And then she remarried this man, Dionisio Gubatayo, who's a Filipino man from the Philippines. He traveled the world, ended up in Alaska, and there's a lot of Filipinos in Alaska. But she took the children from the first marriage, it included my great-grandmother, or my grandmother actually, and they moved to the Seattle moved to Seattle in 1923. So I'm from the Kagwantan clan. I guess this is our street that we own up in Sitka. It's interesting that a lot of American cities are named after native tribes of the region. So this is what is left for us. I am from the Eagle moiety, so the tribe is split into two halves, and it's a matrilineal society. So you're either born into Eagle or Raven moiety, and by tribal law, you must marry over to the other side. So I'm Eagle. I'm still part of this matrilineal connection through my mother. My grandmother actually married a Filipino man too, so I am also part Filipino, and so technically I'm a Tlingit. This is killer whale is our crest symbol. That's what represents our family. So this is a photo that my great-grandmother, when she went back up into Alaska in the 40s after she moved to Seattle, again, the center of attention there. Another street sign, Katlian. Apparently, Katlian is a historic war chief from the Sitka area we're descendants of. And so here's me in some of our traditional regalia. I just wanted to get real personal and share some photos of my family. This is my father. So my father is not native. He's not Filipino. He's mixed European. So he was a famous fisherman in the Northwest. He worked for Boeing most of his life, but he had a passion for fly tying, and we had the same name, so we would often get confused for each other. People would come up to an art exhibition. There's like, I didn't know that you were a fisherman too. And I said, oh, no, that's my father. And so we would get mistaken for each other all the time, and he would get phone calls from galleries saying like, oh, I just discovered your work. I want to carry your stuff. He's like, well, that's my son. You have to call him. My mother. So I give a lot of credit to my family because they were always, my father was a great outdoorsman. He was a mountain climber, rock climber, telemark ski instructor. He was a fly tyer. He was, you can Google search him, and if those of you who are interested in fly fishing, he's a very fascinating man. And my mother and they divorced, but they would sing Delta blues and folk songs when I was growing up, and so part of my passion also became music, but not before I met this. Well, after actually, I met this woman here. This is my wife, Åsa Sandlund. She is a raven from the other side of the world. She's Swedish, so we met on a work trip in 1993. We got married in 95, and we had these two kids. They're all grown up now. They're 21 and 23, so I didn't find a picture of them to throw in there. But anyway, this was part of my passion growing up. The only thing I really wanted to do was to be a rock musician, to be a rock star. Was my chosen profession, but it never worked out for me. Well, I mean, I still play music, and I'll talk about that as well, but this was the group that I was, so for many years when I was glass blowing, and I was also trying to make it as a musician, but it was May 18th, 1980, was the eruption of Mount St. Helens, and so what happened from that was they took the ash from the mountain, and they would melt it into glass. This was a little production factory in Seattle called the Glass Eye Studios, and that's where I got my start as a glassblower in 1982 through the introduction of my good friend Dante Marioni, who I went to high school with, and he's a very prominent glassblower today. This is the studio. After about 3 years, I started Benjamin Moore, the man here kind of like right next to me. He bought the Glass Eye Studio in about 1986. And I always kind of joke like, okay, he bought the furnaces and the benches and all the workstations and me. So I came from the factory, and then I started to work with Benjamin. And that's where I started to really get into that was how I got my training. I didn't go to school for art. I didn't go to school for glass blowing. I kind of fell into this job, and I met this man, Lino Tagliapietra, and there's Dante on the right. So here we are up at Pilchuck. I started going there in 1984. This was very grainy photo there. Anyway, so here we were working like in 1987, working for the school. Of course, Benjamin was Dale Chihuli's right-hand man. He was a student of Dale's, and so when Lino would come to Seattle, Benjamin's team, which I was on, we would conjoin the teams. And at that time, Benny was sort of his interpreter. So he kind of helped us learn about the processes that we need to assist him in the studio. And these are some of the pieces that I was making at that time. Basically, classical forms, learning how to blow glass, learning how to handle the material. I called these scribble vases. These were kind of large, and so I was trying to figure out how to make big glass like everybody was doing. These I called the Genie bottles, the Genie series. Kind of reflective of Italian glass techniques of Incolmo and joining bubbles together, but also kind of reflected a Scandinavian sensibility, which I got from when I was chasing after my wife in 1993. And this was kind of really where, so decorative arts of the 30s and 40s was kind of my influence. And these are really inspired by this designer, Napoleon Martinuzzi, who was an Italian designer. So I called this the Preston series. But they were kind of, so that was, I quickly figured out that it was going to be really difficult to make a mark for myself making these classical vase forms. So now I'm this is big dramatic lead up. I have a lot of stories to tell here. This is kind of how, part of the confluence of who I am. And I didn't grow up with any religious instruction. I didn't, wasn't forced to go to church or anything. And I read these Carlos Castaneda books in high school, and everybody was reading them at that time, and it was a really popular writer, and it kind of unlocked some idea of mysticism and spirituality for me. Come to learn that all of his writings were sort of debunked because he wasn't hanging out with a Mexican shaman. He was sitting in a LA library somewhere writing these stories. But there's a lot of things about those writings that there was probably some experiences that he had, but it's hard to believe everything that he wrote. But something about navigating in your dream time, and you're having a lucid dream. If you can find your hand, you focus on your hand, and then you can start to recognize where you are, and then you can navigate within your dream time. So that was something that was really fascinating for me. So really, basically, it just left me open to the idea of spiritual connections from in different ways. So I became interested in that idea of dream analysis, and of course, Jung was one of the biggest proponents of that. Freud and Jung, of course, but I really went for the Jung side of things, and it actually had studied the Native American vision quest and spent time in New Mexico, and so I found that very, very fascinating. I didn't know what it meant to me at the time, but it was something that was really part of my thought process. Also, Aikido which is a martial art that I studied for several years. And it was something that I made an instant connection with it through the physical process of it, because, in Aikido, you're kind of dealing with a oncoming force, and you have to change the direction of the the energy. But I started to think about it in terms of wrestling this glass blowing pipe and manipulating glass, because it's moving on this end of this pipe, and you have to kind of manipulate your body to it. And then there's a lot of things that, it was just personal. That's what it meant to me. In the summer of 2000, I met Joe David, who has become my most important mentor. He is from the Nuu-chah-nulth tribe from the west coast of Vancouver Island, so very kind of related to, close to Alaska, but a little bit different cultural style. He introduced me to the sweat lodge ceremony. And so that was something that I didn't really have a choice in doing it. I didn't know what to expect. I'd never done it before. I wasn't sure. And he told everybody, those of you who are interested, come talk to me, and I'll look into your eyes, and I'll tell you, what you need to know, and I'll let you know, if you're ready to do this. And I was really nervous because I had never done a sweat lodge before. Because it's a suffering and sacrifice ceremony and all this stuff. And so everybody's like, oh, what's he going to do to us up there on the, in this ceremony? And I turned to Joe and I said, Joe, just like, look into my eyes. Tell me, am I ready for this? And he goes, well, let me put it this way. He says, you better be. And he goes, you're my number one guy. And so 11 days time, we did 4 sweats up at the school, at Pilchuck School. And then after that 4th ceremony, he adopted me, or he shared his name with me. And for me, for Native cultures, sometimes you assume different names throughout your lifetime, depending on, what, if you're going to assume, be the house leader or something, you might assume an ancestral name. So this was significant to me. This was something that, kind of validated me at the time. And we spent 10 years doing sweat lodges up at Pilchuck, and that was just an amazing time. So I'm getting closer to talking about my work, but Joseph Campbell was another component of that, this whole idea of mythology, comparative mythology, symbolism, and all of that. I'm kind of, it's a little 2 steps forward, 1 step back. This was something that was another component of this confluence of influences that I have. When he talks about the monomyth and the archetypes of the different things that, so in a lot of ways, when I think about, all I wanted to be was a rock musician. And I got pulled into this idea of interpreting my culture through this material of glass. So that's my monomyth. That's my. It's like Luke Skywalker. He's like, his parents were killed, and then he had to go find Joe David, and then I learned all these things, and so that was. So for me, it was kind of like a genetic memory that is awakening in me. I actually started doing the native art style in about 1988. And I said, I met this guy, I met this hat. So I'm trying to figure out, like, what can I do to make glass and do this design work? So I started to look at cultural objects, and I started to try to mimic them in the material of glass. And at one point, I'll tell you all this story because a lot of you have never met me before, so I'm not repeating myself. But my aunt was really excited that I was doing this artwork, and because it was connected to our culture. And so I had made a hat like this, and I didn't know, what was going to happen with it. But we have this holiday open house at Benjamin's studio every year. And Benjamin has this really beautiful gallery area with these pedestals and these beautiful lights and everything. And some of us, the rest of us, get a card table over in the corner. But my aunt said, "Can we put this hat on the pedestal with this nice light?" And I said, "Sure." So I took Benny's piece down and I, picked it up, and 10 people followed me, and I put it on the pedestal, and these shadows came through, and everybody's like, "Oh, look at that! Whoa!" It's like, and I said, "Well, yeah, that's what I intended all along." That was like the eureka moment for me. That when I realized that when the lighting is correct and you get that shadow effect, that's what sort of spurred me on and kept me going. And I make these forms every so often, but you can change the design every time I'll make a new design. So anyways, so going through kind of like the what can I achieve in glass that looks like Northwest Coast art, Tlingit style art. So I was looking at all these objects and and as my skills advanced, I was able to make more and more complex things. This is probably about the most complicated thing that I could even ever choose to make, because there's so many elements that are connected in so much detail and proportion. But this is a raven rattle. This is kind of a ceremonial rattle. This is an oyster catcher rattle. This is sort of a shaman's rattle. And when I do the shamanic types of material, the thing about Northwest Coast art is that it's fraught with intellectual property issues. A lot of this stuff kind of refers back to family symbolism and family crests and things like that, and stories even that are owned by certain families. So when I'm doing these kinds of, anthropomorphic, or zoomorphic, sculptural forms, I'm sort of walking the line, so to speak, and not offending my own community. So there was a lot to explore there. So after I met Joe David in 2000, we had already determined that we were going to make a totem pole for the Pilchuck School. So for several reasons, we made this. We were trying to celebrate the school in 30 years of the school being in existence. And there he is. There's David Svensson. This is the guy I met in 1988 who had spent many, many summers up in Alaska. Non-native guy, but he was trained by Tlingit carvers. And so he met me kind of like tracing designs out of books and trying to figure out how to do this cultural artwork. And he said, you should do this, you should follow this path, and it could be incredible. And I took his advice, and so it was his idea to do the totem pole. And I was in a perfect position, being involved with the Pilchuck School, that I could sort of drive this project. And so I pushed it, and they adopted the idea because John Halberg was the heir to Weyerhaeuser, so we thought it befitting to make a cedar monument that represented this story. He also donated the land to which Pilchuck is situated. He was a passionate Northwest Coast art collector, and he had repatriated a ceremonial dagger to a family in Alaska, and as a result, he was given the Tlingit name. So here we are. We came together as a class. We made a class surrounding the finishing of the totem pole, and so this is the dagger. So we went to, in a very traditional way, we went to the family who adopted him and said, "Can we make a version of this dagger that symbolizes this connection to John Halberg and tell the story of Pilchuck?" And so here, and if I didn't mention it before, we hollowed out through the back of the totem, and then we lit these glass elements with multicolored neon tubes, because David Svensson is a neon guy as well. So we made these really striking elements. Of course, there's Dale Chihuly there not with a patch over his eye, but like with a vision of glass, right? So, so we really kind of went for a real lateral interpretation, and had a lot of fun with this project. But so a little bit into my studio practice now. So these are two gals that have worked with me for like 17 years, helping me execute my work. And I have a glass blowing studio in the space. I work. Glass blowing is very collaborative, or they're team oriented. So got a lot of my folks here. There's one of those complicated raven rattles I was telling you about. It's like heart attack material. Every time I make them, I feel like I'm going to drop it. It's going to break or something. But anyway, so I cover everything with this rubber tape. This is a green rubber tape you can see there, and I'm drawing onto the surface of the tape. And then I can control the shape, and then or the design. And then Britt here, she cuts out the stencil for me as per my instructions with the line work there, and lifting up the areas, peeling away the areas and exposing the glass. And so we're going to sandblast through that layer of color to expose the color underneath. So here's the sandblasting process. So take note of this, and don't ask me after the presentation, how do you get the designs on there? That's how I get the designs on there. It's exactly, I just showed you. Now you know, you can't not know. Anyways, moving on, this whole confluence of influences that I have in my life, and these indigenous artist gatherings have been really incredible. Traveling to Hawaii and working with artists there, and as well going, and sometimes I'm able to get a portable studio there so I can actually work with other artists and make things for them as well, which is always a lot of fun. Also traveling to New Zealand, I've made several trips down there and just kind of fell in love with these people. Here's me trying to look like a Maori warrior. I said, it's like, what? I said, I love this design style. Like, what? If you were to give me like a moko, what would it be? I don't want to be, culturally inappropriate or whatever, or appropriating the culture. I said, oh yeah, no, we'll give you a moko. I said something to do with fire or the sun or something, because I work around fire all the time. They said, oh yeah, that'd be good. Ruel Moko is the god of volcano earthquakes. And I said, oh, that's great, because lava's like hot glass flowing and stuff. And so, and then so I'm showing it off like, oh yeah, check it out. Like wait, what was that guy's name? Because oh, Ruel Moko. He said, oh yeah, he's a god, right? He goes, yeah, he's a god, but he's kind of a mama's boy. He's always threatening to like shake the earth or blow up a mountain, and his mom's always calming him down. He's like, oh, okay. Oh yeah. Anyways, that's like indigenous humor for you, I guess. But incredible people that just like give you the shirt off their back kind of people, just amazing, very educated and organized and empowered within their culture. It's really an inspiring place to go. I also made a trip with the Cultural Art Exchange to Australia, and met with this fellow who I actually met in Seattle. And then I invited him back to Seattle, and we collaborated. So this is some of his work that, so when I collaborate with people, I always ask them to take the lead in, what are we going to make, and then try to help them achieve their ideas. So these are some of the things I made with Jody Naranjo. She's a Santa Clara Pueblo. It's kind of driven by, I don't know, I mean, I like to share the process with other people so that we can expand the material into indigenous art, because I'm convinced that it does bring another dimension to indigenous art, And of course, Joe David is always somebody who's, pushing me to try new things all the time and push my skills into to the next level. These are some things. So when I work with the other artists, like I said, I kind of go with their vision and how can I help them achieve that. And when I do that, oh, this guy's not native, but anyway, we collaborate a little bit, so it's like back to my roots as a glassblower and kind of this whole cane work process of weaving in a way. And of course, Dante is one of my oldest friends, but we had never ever collaborated together. I just helped him make his work, and sometimes he'd help me make my work. So when we made these pieces, we both signed them and put our name on them. But anyways, working with other artists, it gives me helps me learn, understand how does contemporary indigenous people make work for the current market? Because a lot of the work that I would have made if I was a wood carver, obviously, would be for the community. And so largely all the stuff we make as artists, it doesn't go to the community, it goes to collectors' homes. But, there's nothing wrong with that other than, it does support the arts and it does support this continuation of working and exploring. This was one of the first collaborations I did was with Tammy. And because she's such a popular artist, I knew that the work was going to be really stunning. And it did really achieve the job of forcing the Native American collector to look at the material of glass. Before that, it was a bit of a struggle. But, 20 years later, I'm still working, so it worked out somehow. And then this guy, Lewis Gardner, is amazing. So the green is actually jade stone. So he would carve these little elements to go onto these pieces, and they turned out incredibly, I think. And then I get to work with people like this guy. Some of you know him as Marcus Ammerman. And so we did these things from reflective of his Choctaw culture. These pieces I think were incredible, but nobody wants to buy them. They're still sitting in my studio. Anyways, here we're trying to beat down the doors and show people all this new stuff, but we're kind of missed on that one. Lisa Telford. So there's a tradition of weaving onto bottles, and so these. So I thought, well, why not a blown glass piece? So she turned this into another sort of foam woman this time from the Haida culture creation story. This is Raven Sky River, who's actually part Tlingit as well. Incredible glass sculptor, making these sort of naturalistic sculptures, and then I get to put some design work on them. And so, as I mentioned, I didn't go to school, but I was forced, to find inspiration elsewhere. I first turned to the Surrealists, and that ties into the whole idea of there's a lot of psychoanalysis that went around together with the Surrealists, and so that is really what piqued my interest. And come to realize there's a whole genre called primitivism, which is the modernists. So there was a native scholar, Renard Strickland, who said it's ironic that it was the modernists that forced us to look at the primitive and appreciate differing levels of reality. And so when I read this 2-volume catalog of primitivism, it was just full of inspiration for me, like, how these modernists took inspiration from Native American art and African oceanic art. So this is me turning the tables on the modernists. This is my modernist fish. And so I started playing with these abstractions, and these, and playing, and just, I can't do the same thing over and over, so I keep looking and expanding on in my way, with these forms, and bringing newer and more details into the piece as I can. And so this is kind of playing with some, little bit of abstraction and exploration. And and then playing with the idea of new Raven stories. Like, so this exhibition, Raven in the Box of Daylight, is an old mythology. So what's Raven up to today? So that's my whole next phase, like my next 10-year phase, I think, is going to be like exploring what Raven did after he brought the daylight and after he created the rivers and the streams and all of the things that Raven did in his adventures. So, here, I have these ideas about Raven discovered, the residential grave school sites. Raven's battling climate change. Raven's still trying to affect change in the world, and so I think that's going to be what I work on for my next phase. For my next magic trick, this is kind of playing with a little bit of surrealism and finding new compositions. This is a loon. This also ties into a story, the loon and the blind man, canoe prow figure. So I'm just keep trying to discover new ways of presenting new stories. And then an obvious nod to modernism with, kind of a Calder-like form. So a woodpecker. I was just in the Czech Republic, started going there 10 years ago, and working with this guy on the left, Martin Janicki, this was in October. So we've got an idea of working on some pieces together. And he's a really super talented sculptor on a level that I couldn't touch, and not many people can. So we thought about the idea of looking at Native people, and he says his work looks kind of similar. He says if I make a piece, it's like going to look like some bald Czech guy. I said, well, let's look at some Native people and then try to make pieces inspired by these faces. And this is Thomas Flenderica, who helps me with these castings. This is a piece I made that's 7.5 feet tall, about my great-grandmother who had a pet grizzly bear as a child, or a pet bear. I don't know if they had grizzlies up in Alaska, but there's the bear cub up there, and it actually comes from a real story. And so there's me and my great-grandmother. There's the form. It weighs like 2,000 pounds. This is the wood carver's totem. This is working with the Czech artist to get these. These are lost wax castings. And all of these have a story. These totem poles are supposed to tell a story. That's their purpose. And speaking of storytellers, this is Walter Porter, the guy that inspired me to actually make this Raven show. He was a mythologist. He took the Tlingit stories and he would break them down into metaphors and symbolism, and he shared with me about 10 different stories and how they were all kind of interconnected, and it's really fascinating. But it would probably require that we'd be here for another hour or so, and we don't have that much time. Just a little bit about the show, the exhibition. This is Raven in the beginning of time, and he was a white bird. Anyways, so you'll see the exhibition, hopefully, and this is kind of creating this backdrop of, the idea that the world is in darkness, and here's Raven. So he goes to the fisherman of the night. He asks, where's the daylight? Where's the daylight? He told him, the fishermen tell him of an old man who's hoarding the daylight in his clan house, and learns about his beautiful daughter, who goes out to drink from this natural spring every morning. Raven transforms himself eventually into a hemlock needle, floats down this little stream. She scoops up the water, and she swallows it. She swallows the hemlock needle, and then Raven's now inside of her because he's transformed, and then he transforms yet again into a human child, and so she becomes pregnant. So this is supposed to, kind of illustrate the idea of transformation. So that's how Raven gets into the clan house, and he's a very precocious, mischievous child, and he's always poking around, and he finds these boxes. So he first takes the stars, he tosses them through the smoke hole in the center of the clan house, and they take their place in the sky. Next, he's playing with this box. A few days later, he's reprimanded, and he's like, "Oh, you lost my precious treasures," and the old man's really upset with him, so he's playing with this next box, and when nobody's looking, he takes the box, and it's the moon, and he takes it and he tosses it up through the smoke hole, and it ends up in the nighttime sky. And then finally, then he's really in trouble this time. This boy is like really, he's being scolded and punished, and so he wants to play with this third box, the box that contains the daylight. And the old man says, "No way. Not this time." And so he fusses and he cries and he's screaming and he's not eating and he becomes really weak and he's kind of, laying there. Everybody thinks he might, die. And the daughter says, "Is there anything more important than your grandson?" He says, "Of course you're right." So he puts the box in front of the child and he says, "But don't open the box." And of course, Raven at this point he's tired of being in this human form, and so he grabs the daylight in his beak, and then the old man realizes he's been fooled. So the men of the house, they grab this Raven by the tail, and he's like holding him. They instruct him to hold him over the smoke, the central fire pit. And they throw pitch on it, and this black smoke comes up and turns Raven black. He finally manages to get through, and he breaks daylight on the entire world. At that time, the world was in darkness. Nobody knew, it was very confusing time. You couldn't see anything, didn't know what you were doing half the time. And so he eventually, so the people with this flash of light, they become startled, and they run off into the forest, and they jump into the water, and they take off and jump into the sky, and they become the birds and the animals of that region. And then the people who stood up, there's two versions of the story. The people that stood up strong and proud, they became the human beings. Or the people that were just bewildered and didn't know what better to do, as they stood up there like, oh, they became the human beings. So anyway, so over time, then they adopted these animal symbols as their crest. So that last photo was the clan system coming into the birth of the clan system. So now we're moving on to the musical part of the presentation. This was so I kind of rekindled my passion for music, and I thought this time it's going to be a native band. I'm gonna take native musicians, and we're going to work together. And so I had the good fortune of working with James Luna, an amazing performance artist, and we put this group together called Little Big Band. A few years later, actually 10 years ago, I met this fellow, Bernie Worrell, who's the keyboard player for Parliament Funkadelic, and created most of the hip-hop music, was sampled of his music that he created and never got credit for. But we ended up working on music for 3 years before he passed away from lung cancer. And we made all of these albums. They're double, triple albums, vinyl. So unfortunately, Bernie passed away in 2016. But so I never became a rock star, but I have these photos that it kind of looks like I am. So, here I working serious, working really hard in the studio, just changing the world with our music. And so these are some of the folks that I work with. So we started with Gene Tagaban and Clarissa Rizal, who's a Chilkat weaver. They're both Tlingit tribal members. And so we went in and started improvising music. And we ended up just enjoying this process and playing with this incredible man who's a really amazing improvisational musician. And he helped us create this sort of rock and funk and jazz style music. And we do spoken word storytelling. We use indigenous languages. We use Tlingit, Haida, and Yupik languages. And some of the jazz musicians that we work with takes it into a whole nother level. And this is a little bit of a preview of what's going to happen Saturday night over at the First Americans Museum at 6 o'clock. Actually, we'll be there all day with the musical symposium, but then at 6 o'clock we're going to start. We're going to play between 6 and 9 with a little intermission where I have to get on stage again and talk about art and stuff again. But it's going to be a long day, but it'll be worth it because I'm start to feel like that those actors that also play music, like, oh no, you like my movie, but you got to come hear my music. Come on, So that's me, that guy. So I have a little video here I like to finish with.
From the new album, Wooch.
Wooch! Hey, we're bringing a brother up here, a nephew. This is our nephew here. Air Jazz.
Achunim. Achat. Who ich, for whom I speak. Let's take it up a peek. If confidence is key, don't be confidential. Like under compliments, so you got potential of going continental. With unity, you and me, using these communities, usually see mutiny to achieve peace. Orbiting north with no form of revenge, proportionate to the force, don't go over the edge. Equality is out their league, they can warm up the bench. When they want to see you speak, they will board your ship. North Star, higher than a pulsar, higher when you're cold hard, quicker than a sports car. North Star, you are the avatar, turn to pass an after party, don't need the alcohol. Cool eek, that is for whom I speak. Cool eek, this is performance of the week. Yeah.
Spiritual warfare. Prayer warriors, get ready. Salada Suju's hot eye.
Jerry Kitch, Achle Tuch Sakik, Yakuik, Antawanagu, Yusling Kitchkafli. Would you conduct just cut conduct, nigga, why you conduct Dutch Crunch? Duga, entity, would run there, outity. It's a hunt to cut you on, good Kayana, ha. Let at the gun, done a duck rusty ton. Sikubu Yagi, ha ani, Toots Han, Ekina, it's a han, Cool for whom I speak. This is performance of the week.
This is spiritual warfare. Prayer warriors, get ready. Salana Suju.
spiritual. Warfare. Spiritual warfare. None of us want to go there, but we must do what we must do for the ones yet to come here. Each and every one of us has a duty here tonight. If you're listening, use your heart and do that shit right. Educate the next generation up and coming and lift them up with everything that you got and do something. Don't just stand back and be like, oh, that's so sad, man. Rise up and do what you can. Hey!
We go higher,
Get ready, get ready, get ready, rise up.
Do what you can.
Rise up, rise up, rise up. Get ready, rise up, rise up.
Do what you can.
Do the work now. Do the work now. Do the work now.
A couple ways you can keep tabs on what's going on through the studio, music, and art. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here tonight. Goodness sheesh. I know there's no questions. I told you everything, so it's like not much more to tell. The question over here.
How do you get the colors so that the colors of all your art in glass?
Excuse me. The colors, asking about the color of the work, and it's actually colored glass that I use. So we apply it in different ways from either this rod form or a powdered sort of crushed glass form. And so what I do is I'll put like it's like confectioner's sugar, right? So I'll sift it onto the surface of the glass and it melts into the surface, and then I build that layer up, and so when I blow it up, it'll maintain its integrity, color integrity, and then when I sandblast through, I expose the color underneath. Yes?
Can you tell a little bit about the stained glass window that you created for St. Paul's Cathedral?
Oh, sure, yeah. The piece that brought me to Oklahoma the very first time was this. Mary Jo Watson was the involved with St. Paul's Cathedral, and you're all probably familiar with that. And they wanted to, with this restoration project, they wanted to make an art piece to honor Reverend Okerhader, who was involved with the church as well. I guess he was a war chief, and then he was a peace chief. He became involved with the church, and so I made this plate, and they pretty much directed me on what to do. I just kind of displayed it in such a way that they wanted to use his glyph, which was kind of a sweat lodge, very kind of like a petroglyph kind of form that was really synonymous with him as a person. So I made this red plate, a handmade glass plate, and then with the layers of color, and then I sandblasted this black little petroglyph form. And as a very happenstance, there was like this, I squeezed the color together when I was shaping it that made this red dot, and I was like, oh, I messed it up. It has this little concentration of red, and it turned out to look just like the sun. And they're like, no, that's perfect. That's perfect. It just, it was meant to be. So, so I came out here and had the idea of making this kind of like these branches that were kind of wrapping around the form itself, this round circle, either like, tree branches or a thorny crown or whatever, however you want to look at it. Yes, up here.
Reflect on the fusion between your music practice and your glass practice.
Well, to me, because, as I kind of talked about in the very beginning, that was my impetus, the music and the art. So when I started, playing in bands in the 80s, it seemed like it was really everything was possible. And then the Seattle music scene hit, and all these grunge bands got all of the attention, and this all of the rest of us got kind of overshadowed by all that. And so I got tired of playing music on a Thursday night in front of 25 people, and I just dragging my amplifiers in at 2 in the morning and getting up and working at 6 or 7 the next day. So when I kind of started to work with Native musicians, then I found this camaraderie around that process, and we started. So the name of the group is Ku'ik, the most current band, and that it actually means potlatch in the Tlingit language. So, and to me, a simple definition of what a potlatch is: it's a sharing of songs and dances and stories. It's much bigger than that. It's actually they'd raise totem poles and give children names, and they would kind of work out inter clan politics and but it was really just a party of celebrating the culture for up to 8 days, and so we decided to call the band that because essentially that's what we're trying to do. Keep stories alive in different forms. Some of it's like beat poetry, some of it's rap, some of it's like spoken word. And so for me, it's synonymous with how I express myself today. So it's that's why I talk extensively about it, because it's I think when the group is quite large and we get that many people on stage, it's a pretty amazing force of nature, and super fun. And the jazz musicians can take it, into a whole nother level with improvisation and exploration. And now we're actually dealing with native themes. We're dealing with, the first album's called The Wilderness Within. It was kind of like this discovery of how we could synthesize these traditional songs. We started taking clan songs, and we would, figure out the chords underneath it, and then we would interpret it in that way. And then we would, do a spoken word piece, and then we do a sort of a rockish piece, and we do like a real funky, danceable piece. And each time we just total happenstance, very organic, the way that we used to write. When we had Bernie Worrell working with us for a very limited time, we just would let tape roll, and then just, we would just add to it after he had left. Today we're actually writing more songs, but we're dealing with native themes. We're dealing, the next album was called "They Forgot They Survived," and it kind of talks about how we have endured, the history that we all belong to, and the things that have happened to our cultures and our communities. And yes, we forgot we survived, but we did survive. We're here, and so. Sometimes I kind of hate to say we're still here. I like that we're still continuing. I mean, that's what we're doing, is we're declaring who we are and how we like to represent ourselves. And then anyway, it goes on and on. The third album, I'll just stop on that one, but that was around the time that the Dakota Pipeline was happening and the standoff there, and so we called it Heen, which in Tlingit means water. So all of the songs on that particular album were dealing with aspects of water, either in title or even sometimes in spoken word and so forth. So we're actually trying to use it as a vehicle to kind of convey messages and commentary on our native culture and what we're all still dealing with. And then I think then the artwork kind of speaks for itself, kind of paving new ways with new materials, trying to gain some foothold in that realm, and also kind of showing that native cultures are have the ability to work with other materials. It's strictly an anthropological view, I think, that to say that, this was the way it was done, and that was, and, it'll never be the same. It's, belongs in a museum. It's like we're still creating and we're still making art. We're still the seers in the community that have these epiphanies, and we can transform it into art forms. Well, I think I've spoken long enough. Unless anybody has a burning question that they would like to ask, I'm happy to take more questions, or if you're guys are itching to get out of here, that's okay too. Thank you very much.